My therapist broke me more than my ex ever did. I don't even know where to start. I've had this post sitting in my drafts for over a week, and every time I try to write it, I feel like I'm betraying something. Or someone, maybe even myself. But I can't keep holding it in. I need to let this out somewhere, even if it's just screaming into the void. So here it goes. A few months ago, I hit rock bottom. I mean, like, sleeping on the bathroom floor kind of bottom. I wasn't eating, barely showering, barely functioning. I just got out of a 3-year relationship with a guy who made me feel like nothing I did was ever enough, like I had to work for the privilege of being loved. And then I found out he'd been cheating on me with someone from his gym, and somehow he still made it feel like my fault. Classic, right? I'm 25, I work in healthcare, and I thought I was strong. I've held people's hands while they died, I've worked 12-hour shifts on no sleep, I've seen things most people would flinch at. But heartbreak, real soul-shattering heartbreak, that wrecked me in a way I wasn't prepared for. So I did what you're supposed to do. I found a therapist. First, it was just about surviving. I was numb. I couldn't even cry. But he, let's call him D, had this way of talking to me that made it feel like he got me, like really saw me. Not just the broken version of me, but the before me, the one who used to have dreams and jokes and energy. I didn't even know how badly I needed to feel understood until he looked me in the eye and said, "You're not crazy for feeling this way. You're grieving." I cried in that session for the first time in months. And yeah, therapy's supposed to feel safe. But there was something else that started happening, something I didn't know how to name at the time. He'd lean forward just a little when I spoke. He'd remember tiny things I mentioned in passing and bring them up in later sessions. He'd say things like, "You're one of the most insightful clients I've ever worked with." And I'd feel this warm pride blooming in my chest. God, I was starving for any kind of emotional connection, and he knew that. Looking back now, I don't think he ever technically crossed a line. Not at first. But it was all in the tone, the timing, the way he'd let silences stretch just long enough to make me feel like we were sharing something unspoken. The way he'd say, "Most people wouldn't understand you, but I do." Do you know how dangerous that is? Telling someone who's vulnerable, whose entire sense of worth just got shattered, that they're uniquely seen, that they're special. Yeah, I fell for him, slowly then all at once. And the worst part, I thought he was falling for me too. There was a session where I was talking about this dream. I'd had something weird and abstract about swimming in the ocean and getting caught in a net. And he asked me, "Do you think you're trying to save yourself or waiting for someone else to save you?" I laughed it off, said something sarcastic like, "Guess I have a savior complex." And he looked at me, really looked at me, and said, "Maybe you just want someone to finally choose you." I swear to God, the room spun. That one sentence wrecked me more than anything my ex ever said or did. Because D did choose me, or so I thought. I started dressing up for our sessions, putting on makeup again, telling myself it was self-care, but deep down I knew I was hoping he'd notice. He always did. He'd say things like, "You seem brighter today," or "There's something different about your energy," in a good way. This was the man I told everything to. My traumas, my fears, my darkest thoughts. And I didn't realize until it was too late that I had no defenses left. None. And the sick part, I didn't want any. Sometimes I wonder if I would have fallen so hard for him if I hadn't been so damn lonely. But that's the thing, loneliness doesn't just whisper, it screams. And D, he was the only one who seemed to be listening. I started counting the days between sessions like a teenager waiting for a text from their crush. I'd rehearse what I wanted to say, not because I wanted help, but because I wanted to impress him. I was trying to be the perfect client, the one with the most depth, the most insight, the one who got it. And he played into that. God, did he play into that? He never made a move, never touched me, never said anything overtly inappropriate. But the space between us, that sacred professional boundary, it was gone, and I think we both knew it. One time I was talking about how hard it was to connect with people at work, how isolated I felt in a job that's supposed to be about care and empathy. I said something like, "It's exhausting being everyone's rock when no one gives a shit if you're crumbling." And he leaned in and said, "Maybe it's not that no one gives a shit. Maybe they just don't know how to love someone like you." That sentence sat with me for days. I wrote it down. I stared at it like it was scripture. I started fantasizing about what it would be like if we met under different circumstances. Like, if he wasn't my therapist, would he still be interested in me? Would we go out for coffee? Would he text me good morning? Would he hold me when I spiraled at 2 a.m. instead of just nodding behind a notebook? I was losing the line between therapy and romance, between healing and hunger. And yeah, I know the ethical guidelines. I've read them. I even talked about it in college when I took psych electives, the power dynamics, the risks. But nothing prepares you for what it feels like when your therapist becomes your emotional lifeline, when you start craving their approval like oxygen. One day, I did something reckless. I messaged him. Not about scheduling or rescheduling, just I don't even remember what I said. Something benign, something I told myself was harmless. But the point is, I initiated contact outside of sessions, and he responded, warmly, not professionally. He said, "It's okay, I don't mind hearing from you. You can always reach out if something's on your mind." I think that's the moment it tipped. After that, I'd send him little things, quotes that reminded me of our conversations, articles, songs, and he'd respond, always with care, always a little too much care. I remember one time I sent him a photo of this painting I saw that made me feel something I couldn't quite explain. He replied, "It's beautiful, like something you'd make if you ever let yourself create again." What the hell does that even mean? But at the time, it felt like magic, like someone saw a light in me I didn't even remember I had. And then it happened. During one session, I was spiraling, talking about how exhausted I was, how I felt like I was falling back into old patterns, how I was terrified I'd never feel truly wanted again. And I said something like, "I don't know why I'm even trying anymore." He didn't say anything for a long time, just stared at me with this look, not clinical, not detached. It was soft, too soft. And he said, "If I weren't your therapist, I'd tell you that you're one of the most incredible women I've ever met." I froze. My heart was beating so loud I thought I might pass out. I didn't know what to say. I smiled, not because I was happy, but because I didn't know what else to do. He didn't take it back. He didn't correct himself. He just sat there and let it land. And I let it root inside me. That night, I couldn't sleep. I replayed the session over and over in my head, trying to convince myself that I was reading into it, that maybe he was just being encouraging, supportive, kind. But something shifted after that. He started being more careful, but in a way that made it worse. He'd pull back just enough to keep plausible deniability, but not enough to stop the bond he'd built. I was constantly questioning myself. Was I imagining it? Was I projecting? Was this all just some delusional crush because I was vulnerable? But then why did he let it keep going? Why didn't he stop it? Why didn't he stop me? It's crazy how easy it is to convince yourself that you want something when it's all you've ever wanted but never had the chance to get. That's how it felt, like this thing was just meant to be, but I wasn't brave enough to admit it. And somehow, he had figured it out before I did. He knew I wanted him before I did. Or at least, he knew that I needed him. It was a Thursday, right before our session. I'd been dreading it for days. Something felt off. My stomach was in knots like I was waiting for a fight or something, but I couldn't put my finger on it. I spent hours staring at myself in the mirror, wondering if I was crazy. But then I walked into his office, and I immediately felt the difference. The air was thicker. He didn't smile at me the way he usually did. There was a weight in his eyes, something that made my heart pound. I don't know if I was imagining it, but it felt like the tension was palpable. He sat down, no pleasantries, no small talk. He just said, "You've been distant lately, something going on, what's wrong?" And I knew. In that moment, I knew I'd crossed the point of no return. I don't even know why I said what I did. But I started talking, rambling, saying something about how I didn't think I could trust myself anymore, how everything felt like a mess, how I was scared I'd never be whole again. But then I said it. I looked at him, really looked at him, and said, "I don't know how to stop thinking about you." I thought he'd say something, pull back, call me out on my delusions, tell me this was wrong. But instead, he did the opposite. He leaned forward, just a little, and said, "You're not the only one." I froze. Time stopped. I swear I could hear my heart beating in my ears. He went on like it was nothing, like we were just two normal people having a normal conversation. "I've been thinking about you too. You're a fascinating woman. I don't blame you for feeling this way." I couldn't breathe. I wanted to run, to scream, to get out of that room. But I stayed. I stayed because I was terrified of what would happen if I didn't. I stayed because in that moment I felt seen. He saw me. Not just my broken parts, but the parts I had locked away and forgotten about. The parts I didn't even know were still alive. And I wanted it. God, I wanted it so badly. But it wasn't real. It couldn't be. This was wrong. This was a professional relationship. He was my therapist. He was supposed to help me heal, not break me open more than I already was. But when he looked at me like that, like he was so close to saying something, I couldn't stop myself from leaning in just a little. I think I just wanted to test the waters, to see if he would really cross the line. And then he did. He said, "I think we both need a break. You need to think about what's going on here, what you want from all this." His words were so gentle, but there was something underneath them, something unspoken. He was giving me permission to want him. He was giving me permission to fantasize about it, and I was too far gone to pull back. I didn't answer him. I just nodded, and we went on with the session, talking about other things, like everything was normal. But it wasn't normal. It was anything but normal. I left that session feeling like I was floating, like I had won some kind of victory, like something real was happening between us. But I wasn't fooling anyone but myself. I wasn't the one in control. Not anymore. The next few days were a blur. It felt like I was walking in a fog, disconnected from everything around me. I couldn't focus at work. Every little task felt like it was happening in slow motion. I couldn't stop replaying our last session in my head, the way he looked at me, the things he said. It was like he saw me in a way no one had ever seen me before. But the worst part, I started to question whether I was even me anymore. What happened to the woman who was supposed to be strong? The one who had just gotten out of a toxic relationship and was supposed to be learning to trust again. Now here I was, getting attached to someone who was supposed to be my healer. I was back at square one, but it was worse. This time, I wasn't just stuck in a broken relationship. I was stuck in a relationship with someone I knew I couldn't have. But it didn't matter. I still couldn't stop myself from wanting him. I sent him a message a couple of days after our session, not for any real reason, just to check in, to make sure he wasn't upset by our conversation. That was my excuse. But deep down, I was hoping he'd reach out. Hoping he'd say something that would make me feel like maybe this wasn't all in my head. And he responded, just like I knew he would. I've been thinking about you. I think we need to talk more about what's going on between us. I couldn't breathe. My heart was hammering in my chest. He wanted to talk about it. He wanted to cross that line with me. He was going to break every rule in the book, and I didn't care. I was already too deep in it. We scheduled another session, and I walked into that office with my heart in my throat. I could feel the weight of what was about to happen. This wasn't just a therapy session anymore. It was our moment, and I couldn't stop it. When I sat down, he didn't waste any time. He looked at me with that intense gaze of his and said, "We can't keep pretending this is just about your healing. This connection between us, it's more than that." I froze. It was saying everything I'd been terrified to admit out loud. He was acknowledging that we were both beyond the professional line. "What do you want?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. I didn't know if I even wanted anything anymore. I was so lost in the pull of him that I couldn't think straight. I was too scared to say what I really felt because deep down I knew it was wrong. I knew it was wrong, but I was already so far gone, I couldn't pull back. I was addicted to the idea of him, addicted to his attention, addicted to the way he made me feel like I mattered for the first time in years. I started to say, but my voice caught in my throat. He reached out then, not a touch, but it was close enough. His hand hovered just above mine like he was waiting for me to close the gap. And I did. I closed it. I let our hands touch, and it felt like a fire ignited inside me. It wasn't just a touch. It was a declaration. We were crossing the line. But that's when the first real sense of panic hit me. This wasn't just about wanting him anymore. This was about losing myself. I pulled my hand back and stood up, almost stumbling. I was shaking, my breath coming in short gasps. I didn't know what was real anymore. Was this love? Was this obsession? Was this healing, or was I just trading one addiction for another? He watched me, his face unreadable, but there was something in his eyes, regret. Guilt. It was hard to tell. And then he spoke, and his words crushed me. "I think we both know this isn't going to work. Not the way it's supposed to." I blinked. I thought I was hearing things. What did he mean? He was the one who started this. He was the one who let it get this far, and now, just like that, he was backing away. "Don't say that," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "Don't tell me it's over." But he was already getting up, walking toward the door. "You're not ready. You need to figure out what you really want before you destroy everything." And with that, he left. It was like I'd stepped off the edge of a cliff, but I couldn't see the bottom. I kept going through the motions at work, seeing patients, pretending like everything was fine, but inside I was a mess. I couldn't stop thinking about him, about how he had said it was over, about how he had let me touch him, let me feel like maybe, just maybe, this could be something real. But it wasn't real. It couldn't be. I spent hours rereading our messages, wondering where it had gone wrong. I thought back to every session, every word he'd ever said to me, and tried to piece together the moments where I could have done something differently. But the truth was, I didn't care about the how. I cared about why. I needed him. It wasn't just about wanting him anymore. It was about needing him to feel like I wasn't broken, to feel like I could be whole again. I'd spent so long in that toxic marriage, trying to fix someone else, that I forgot what it was like to take care of myself. And now I was here, tangled in a mess I created. I tried to reach out to him again. I thought if I could just explain how I felt, if I could just make him understand, maybe he'd change his mind. Maybe we could make this work, despite everything. But I didn't get a response. I tried again, and again, each time the same silence. And then it hit me. He wasn't just pulling away. He was cutting me off completely. I couldn't ignore the signs anymore. He wasn't just my therapist. He was using me. I was just another patient, another person he could manipulate, another person he could control. I had never been special to him. I had been his escape, his distraction, a place to hide from his own demons while I let him be mine. And I was done. I couldn't do it anymore. I couldn't keep pretending like I wasn't falling apart inside, like I wasn't destroying myself over someone who didn't even care. I went back to therapy the following week, but this time I wasn't there for him. I wasn't there to fix anything. I was there for myself. He sat across from me, looking at me like he was trying to read me. I could tell he was waiting for me to speak, to fall into the same patterns of dependency. But I didn't. "I'm done," I said. The words were slow, but they felt so freeing. "I'm done pretending like I need you." He blinked. "What do you mean?" I stood up, feeling my legs shake under me. I felt like I might fall, but I didn't care. I was ready to leave. "I don't need you, not like this." My voice broke, but I forced myself to keep going. "You crossed a line, and I let you, but I won't do that anymore. I can't." I walked to the door, and for the first time in months, I felt like I was in control of my own life. I didn't know where I was going or how I was going to pick up the pieces, but I knew I was done with him. Done with the games, done with the manipulation. I was going to heal, but I would do it on my own. The door slammed shut behind me, and the weight that had been on my chest for so long finally began to lift. But even as I left, I knew this wouldn't be the end. There would still be days when I would miss the attention, miss the way he made me feel wanted, even if it was all a lie. But I couldn't go back to that. I wouldn't. A few months later, I finally started to feel like myself again. It wasn't easy. There were still days when I found myself wishing I could just send him a message, ask how he was doing. I would look at his name in my phone, hovering over it, my finger trembling, but I never hit send. I had to keep reminding myself I wasn't weak, I wasn't broken, I was just human. I learned how to be alone again, how to face my own demons without anyone to hide behind. And slowly, the fog started to clear. I started going to therapy again, this time for myself. I began building my life again, brick by brick, and even though it wasn't perfect, I was proud of what I was creating. It wasn't until months later that I realized something important. He never called, he never messaged, he never came back. And for the first time in so long, I felt truly free.